Sechas Megillah Daf Chaf Tes is a relatively lengthy daf divided in half by one Mishnah. First half of the daf is discussing primarily Agadata, statements about the covet of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Shechina in exile, covet of wedding, a mace, and things of that nature. The Mishnah will introduce the topic of the four special parshios which are read during the month of Adar, or just preceding the month of Adar. The Gemara will focus on Parshas Shkolim, give its source, and what exactly is Parshas Shkolim, and the Gemara will bring a number of proofs on that subject. So let's begin. So the Gemara starts with the Brisa, last word on Daf Chav Ches. Brisa says, you can stop learning Torah in order to join a funeral or a wedding to show covet for the mace or for the kala. They say by Yehuda Bar Ilai that he would stop learning in order to go walk a mace out and to bring a kala to the chuppah. Now, says the Gemara, when is this true that you should be mevatel Talmud Torah for the covet of a mace to join a funeral? That's only if there aren't enough people there already. The Gemara says, how much is enough people? So Rav Shmuel Barina says the name of Rav, 12,000 people and 6,000 people that are blowing trumpets to announce the honor of the person. And some say that 12,000, 6,000 of which are blowing trumpets, for a total of 12,000 as opposed to a total of 18,000. Now the Gemara says another approach to that is Ula. He says that the minimum requirement is enough people to line the roads from the city to the cemetery. Shesha says should have as many people there at the removal of Torah, at the removal of an neshama from this world, as you had when Torah was given. There should be at least 600,000 people, just like at Har Sinai there were 600,000 Jews, men between the ages of 20 and 60. Now the Gemara says this is all true for somebody who learned the Torah and Psukim. Mishnayos, he learned Mishnah and Psukim, but somebody who also taught it, there is no minimum. Can never say that there are enough people there. There is no way to fulfill the requirement of the kavod that he should receive at his funeral. Says the Gemara, Brisa, Shimon Bar Yochai said, look how beloved are Klal Yisrael to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Every time Klal Yisrael go into exile, the Shechina, the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, goes with them. And he quotes a pasuk in Shmuel. It says, Hanigla Amar Hashem, Hanigloi Nigleisi al Beis Avicha B'Yosem Mitzrayim Leveis Farai. I was with you in exile in Mitzrayim with Paroi. So there we see that Hashem came with us to go us in Mitzrayim. In Vavel, he also came with us, like it says, Lamadchem Shulachti Bavela. And it says Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, when we're going to be redeemed, then the Shechina will be redeemed together with us, like it says, Veshav Hashem lekachal shavoscha. It says, and Hashem will return your returnings. It does not say he will return as in he will cause them to be returned. It doesn't say v'heshiv, but it says Veshav, meaning he will return himself. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself will, as it were, return from the Golus together with us from Bavel. Says the Gemara, Abaye asked, where is the Shechina in Chutz La'aretz today? We said that the Shechina is in exile with us, so where is it? So Abaye says it's in the shul of Hutzel, and it's in the shul called Shaf V'Yasif. Shaf V'Yasif means destroyed and rebuilt. So it could be that it's the name of the shul, or it could be that there was a shul that was destroyed and rebuilt a number of times, and that's why it's called that. Now that is in Nahar. So Gemara says not in both places at the same time, but it alternates between the two. Said Abaye, I should get schar. I will get schar because whenever I came near these two shuls, a parsa away, I would go there to be mispal in the shuls. I would make sure to go out of my way because I know that the Shechina is there. So then the Gemara says that Shmuel's father and Levi were once sitting together in the shul of Shaf V'Yasef in Nahar, and the Shechina arrived. They heard a tremendous noise, and therefore they got up and they left. On a different occasion, Rav Sheshes was sitting alone in the shul of Shaf V'Yasef, and the Shechina arrived, and he did not leave. So the Malchei Yesharis came and tried to threaten him to leave. So he said, Rebbeinu Shalom, somebody who is fortunate, somebody who's unfortunate, who should be the one to be forced out? The unfortunate one or the unfortunate one? Rashi explains he was referring to himself as the unfortunate one because he was blind. Okay, now the Gemara quotes the pasuk Va'ahi lahem lemikdash ma'at. I will be for them for a small Beis Hamikdash. So the Gemara says this is referring to shuls and Batei Medrash in Chutz La'aretz, in Vavel specifically, that they count as a Mikdash Ma'at, as a small shul. Rav Elazar says it refers to the house of Rebbe, the base Rabbeinu. The house of Rebbe was steeped in the Torah, and therefore that's what's referred to as the Mikdash Ra'at. Rava has another pasuk that refers to shuls as a Mikdash Ma'at. Doesn't use the word Mikdash Ma'at, but it says Hashem Ma'on Ata Yisa Lanu, you were a Ma'on to us. That refers to Bati Knesses, Bati Medrashes, shuls, and Bati Medrash. And Abai says that I used to daven in shul, but I learned at home. But when I heard the pasuk Hashem Ahavti Ma'on Beisecha, Hashem, I love the Ma'on of your house, and then I heard from Rava that Ma'on refers to shuls and to Batei Medrash, and Hashem was saying, and I love the Ma'on, then I started to learn in the base Medrash, or that is, I started to learn in the shul as opposed to learning at home. Okay, says the Gemara. Elazar HaKapar says, shuls and Batei Medrash are going to be redeemed from Chutz La'aretz. When Klal Yisrael returns from the exile, the shuls and the Batei Medrash are going to go with them, and they will be set up and established in Eretz Yisrael. How do we see that? Because the mountains which served the Torah for just a short while were moved to Eretz Yisrael. It says, Ki ketavar b'har melcha Carmel b'yam yavo. The mountain of Tovar and the mountain of Carmel will cross the ocean to come to Eretz Yisrael. Now, why do these get the right to cross the ocean? Because they were at the giving of the Torah. They were at Maimon Har Sinai. They themselves wanted the Torah to be given upon them. And there's a Kavach Chomer. If they just served the Torah for one moment, so certainly all the shuls that had Kavua, they had repeating and permanent serving of Torah going on within them, they should certainly get a chance to go to Eretz Yisrael. The Gemara quotes the Medrash, that the mountains all wanted the Torah to be given on them. So we have a pasuk in Tehillim which discusses the different mountains. It says, Lama teratz dun harim gavnunim, so which means, why do these high mountains, why do they dance around? And this is a pasuk describing how they wanted the Torah to be given upon them. So the Gemara explains that read Tiratz Dun as Tirtzu Din. They wanted a court case. They wanted a court case with Sinai and saying, why you give the Torah on Sinai, you should give it on us. So Gemara says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu said to them, why do you want to start up with Sinai? Sinai is a complete mountain, and you're all Bali Mumin. You're all haughty. You have a haughtiness to you. And it's learned from the fact that they're described as Gavnunim. Gavnunim means that they're tall, haughty peaks, but Gavnunim is related to the word Gibein. Gibein is a mum. When the Torah describes mumin of various animals, it says a Gibein oidak. So Gibein is a bad thing. So you see that anybody who's haughty is viewed as a mum. So that's why those mountains weren't chosen, but Har Sinai was chosen. Okay, another Gemara refers back to our Mishnah where we had seen that you can't take a shortcut through a shul. So the word that was used was kapandaria. The Gemara wants to describe kapandaria. The Gemara says it means what it sounds like. The Gemara says, well, what does it sound like? The Gemara says that's someone who says, Adamakifna adri ayel baha. Instead of going around an entire block of houses, I'm going to cut through the houses. I have to get from one street to a parallel street. Instead of walking all the way around, I'm going to cut between the houses or through the houses. Now, you're not allowed to do that in a shul. You're not allowed to cut through the shul, go in one side and out to the other side in order to get to the parallel street. So it says that Rabbi Avo says that if there was a pathway there before the shul was built, and the shul was built over a public pathway, then you are allowed to do that. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says if somebody goes into a shul for whatever reason he needed to be in the shul, he's allowed to go out from the other side. He doesn't have to, even if that shortens his way, he doesn't have to go out the side he came in and then walk all the way around. The Gemara says, Rav Chavo says, named Rav Huna, somebody who goes into a shul to be mispalel, to daven in the shul, is allowed to go out from the other side, doesn't have to go back the way he came in. And you see that because in the Beis Hamikdash, that's what they did. The Gemara quotes the pasuk in Yecheskel, they came in from the north gate, then they went out to the south gate, and even though it shortened their way, that was not considered to be a shortcut, because they were there not to pass through, they were there to use and to be mispalel in the actual Beis Hamikdash itself. Okay, now back in the Mishnah, we had seen that if weeds grow in the floor of a shul, it's no longer in use, you should leave them there. You shouldn't pull them out. The Brisa contradicts it. The Brisa says you can pull them out, you just can't feed it to your animals. So Gemara says, well, our Mishnah also means don't pull them out to feed to your animals, but you're allowed to pull them out and leave them there. Now we have a Brisa that talks about the covet of a cemetery. So the Brisa says you cannot do kalas rosh, you can't do lightheaded things in a cemetery, which means you cannot bring your animals there to eat the grass. You cannot direct a canal to flow through it. You cannot gather up weeds or grass or plants, whatever it is there. If you do, you have to burn them there. And the rest ends off because of the honor of the dead. The Gemara wants to know, honor of the dead, what's that referring to? Which of these things is the honor of the dead? It can't be referring to the last thing of burning the grass, because that in no way is that specifically the honor of the dead, but it's referring to the earlier things of not doing kalas rosh in there. That is because of the honor of the dead. Okay, now we get to our Mishnah. The Mishnah discusses the 4 parshias. So when Adar time rolls around, we start to lane 4 special lanings. They are Parshas Shkolim, Parshas Zachor, Parshas Para, and Parshas Chodesh. Parshas Shkolim, the Mishnah says, is read either on Shabbos Rosh Chodesh Adar or on the Shabbos preceding Rosh Chodesh Adar if Rosh Chodesh Adar does not fall on a Shabbos. Then we take a break for a week. And the Shabbos before Purim we read Parshas Zachor, which talks about destroying Amalek, because Purim is the time for the destruction of Amalek. The 3rd week is Para Aduma, that we read in order to remind us to cleanse ourselves, to become tahar, so we should be able to bring the carbon Pesach in the right time. And Parshas Chodesh, of course, is the Kriya that we should start preparing for Pesach itself. This Rosh Chodesh Nisan is arriving, and we need to get ready for everything that happens there. Now, says the Mishnah, after the 4 parshas are finished, we go back to the regular order. Now, we're going to have a Mishnah, we're going to have a discussion in the Gemara, not on today's daf, but on a different daf. What does it mean go back to the regular order? Does it mean you go back to reading the regular parshas, and up to now you didn't read Parshas HaShavua? That's one opinion. These 4 parshas are read in place of the parsha of the week. We don't do that. We do read the parsha of the week. And that's the second opinion, which says that these 4 replace the normal maftir and haftorah, and therefore we go back to the order, means we go back to the regular, usual maftir and haftorah for those parshios. Now, the Mishnah says we interrupt the normal reading for any special reading that's not referring to the 4 parshas, it's referring to all year. So we would push off the regular reading during the week for Rosh Chodesh, for Chanukah, for Purim, for a fast day, for Ma'amados, a special kriya that goes along with Karbanos, and for Yom Kippur. These all defer the regular Kriyas Torah. Okay, the Gemara brings a Mishnah elsewhere. First Mishnah in Masech Shkolim. It says, when does Shkolim happen? So it says on the 1st of Adar we start announcing about Shkolim, and that's why there's a reading of Parshas Shkolim. Shkolim is to tell us, to remind us all to bring our Shkolim to the Beis HaMikdash. There was a collection every year. Everybody brought a half shekel in order to be able to donate to the purchase of public karbanos, such as carbon tamid in the morning, the afternoon, carbon musaf, Rosh Chodesh, Shabbos, and everything else. All these things have to be brought and bought from Shkolim that are brought in the beginning of every year. Beginning with Chodesh Nisan, we want to be buying karbanos from the new collection. So therefore we have to start announcing Rosh Chodesh Adar so that people know that they have a month to start bringing it, and it's got to be brought in now. Now this Mishnah also says that we start announcing about Kelayim, telling people to make sure that they don't have any vegetables growing in their vineyards. More says that the time for now is because Kelayim begin to grow now, so people have to keep an eye out for it. The time of Shkolim is, like we explained, that this is a time to bring new karbanos, to bring karbanos from the new collections. So Gemara brings a pasuk to support that. It says, Zos olas chodesh b'chodsho l'chodshei hashana. It says the word chodesh, or a similar word, 3 times. Why does it say chodesh 3 times? To teach us you should bring new in the new month. The new month of the new year, you should bring new karbanos that should be purchased with new money. So Gemara says, so therefore we start announcing 30 days before. So Gemara says, why 30 days before? That seems to be holding that you always prepare for an event 30 days before. Well, that's a machlokes. Rav Shimon ben Gamliel says you start learning Hilchos Pesach 2 weeks before Pesach. Tanna Kama says you start learning 30 days before Pesach. So does that mean that this mission doesn't fit with Rav Shimon ben Gamliel? Because according to him, you should only start announcing about Shkalim 2 weeks before Rosh Chodesh Nisan. So Gemara says no. There's a different reason, and that is the money changers who had half Shkalim available for people who brought Brutus to swap. They would set up shop around the country on the 15th of Adar, and therefore we start announcing 2 weeks before that. Now, on the 25th of Adar, they actually set up shop in the Beis HaMikdash itself, and that's when the Shkalim had to be brought by, and if they weren't brought by then we started taking steps to enforce collections. Okay, now, the Gemara wants to know what exactly is Parshas Shkalim. So we read Parshas Shkalim on the Shabbos preceding Rosh Chodesh Adar. What is it? So the Gemara is a machlokes, what it is. Rav says it's the regular reading of Rosh Chodesh, which describes the Karbanos, describes Karban Tamid, describes Karban Musaf of Shabbos, and Karban Musaf of Rosh Chodesh. The Gemara says, why is that called Shkalim? It's called Shkalim because the Shkalim will be used to purchase that, and that's what the Gemara calls Rav Tavi's explanation. Rav Tavi says, since the Shkalim are used to purchase those Karbanos, we read those Karbanos, and that's the reference to the bringing of the Shkalim to purchase that. Now Shmuel says, no, we read from the beginning of Parshas Kisisa, which discusses the collection of Shkalim for the building of the Mishkan. So Gemara asks, but that's the wrong Shkalim. It's very nice that it speaks about Shkalim there, but that Shkalim is something else. What does it have to do with our Shkalim, which is to buy Karbanos? Gemara says no, because it says the word Truma, which means donation, and says that 3 times in that Parsha. One is talking about the Truma to bring Shkalim to build the Mishkan, as it was for the sockets at the bottom of the wall panels that held them together. Another one is for the Karbanos, and that's what we're collecting for now today. And the third one is for the upkeep of the Beis HaMikdash, the Bedek Habayis. Those are the 3 Shkalim collections. Okay, now the Gemara goes into a number of proofs to the 2 sides. Primarily we're going to be proving Shmuel's approach, that Parsha Shkalim is read from Kisisa, and that's actually going to be our final conclusion. So the Gemara asks, we said that you have a special reading when Rosh Chodesh Adar comes out on a Shabbos. Now, according to Rav, that the reading of Parshas Shkalim is the same as the reading for Rosh Chodesh, how's it different than any other Rosh Chodesh that falls on a Shabbos? The fact that it's Parshas Shkalim is going to come out the same. So what are you telling me? It's a different reading. So Gemara says, alright, here's why it's a different reading. On regular Rosh Chodesh, we just read the last Aliyah, which is Maftir. The Gemara calls it the 7th Aliyah because there is an opinion that the 7th Aliyah is Maftir, even though it's not what we do. We've seen that earlier in the Masechta. So the last Aliyah for Rosh Chodesh that falls on a Shabbos and a regular Rosh Chodesh, not Parshas Shkalim, the last Aliyah is the only Kriya for a Rosh Chodesh. The rest is the Parsha of the week. If it's Shkalim, so Parshas Shkalim replaces the entire Kriya of the Parsha of the week, and therefore the entire Parsha will be that laning. It's the same laning as Rosh Chodesh, but it's all 7 Aliyahs instead of just the last one. So when it says, well, that's a machlokes later whether the 4 parshas replace the laning of the week, or they're just the last Aliyah. According to the one that it replaces, you have a good answer. But according to the one that's just the last Aliyah, so now it's the same. Every Rosh Chodesh that falls on the Shabbos, the last Aliyah is lain Rosh Chodesh. Parshas Shkalim also the last Aliyah is lain Rosh Chodesh. So how's it different if Shkalim falls on Shabbos? Someone says, no, it's going to be read differently, and that's because we do 3 Aliyahs and 4 Aliyahs. When Shkalim falls on Rosh Chodesh, when Shkalim, Rosh Chodesh, are on Shabbos, then you lay in 3 Aliyahs of the Parsha of the week and 4 Aliyahs for the Rosh Chodesh. The last 4 Aliyahs are the 4 Aliyahs of Rosh Chodesh, and that will differentiate it from a regular Rosh Chodesh Shabbos, which is not Shkalim, where you have 6 Aliyahs from the week and only the last Aliyah, which is the special Rosh Chodesh reading. Okay, the Gemara now goes on to its next proof. So we have a brisa that says that the Haftorah for Parshas Shkalim is the reading of Yehoyada HaKohen collecting money, collecting Shkalim to restore the Beis HaMikdash. So I understand if the reading is from Parshas Shkalim, is from Kisisa. If the reading of Parshas Shkalim is Kisisa, where it talks about collecting Shkalim, so then the Haftorah matches. It's also talking about collecting Shkalim. But if it's talking about the Karbanos, so how does it match? Mar says, no, it does match, because those Karbanos are paid for from Shkalim, so we have something else which is also Shkalim. So that's not a kasha. It still matches. All right, the Gemara's next kasha. So we have a brisa that says that what happens when Parshas Shkolim falls out the week before or the week after the week, the Shabbos, in which that laning is the laning of the week anyway. So where it says you end up laning the same thing 2 weeks in a row. You lane it for Parsha Shkolim and one for the Parsha of the week. So where it says this very clearly indicates that the laning is from Kisisa, because the Parsha for Kisisa time comes out around Adar time. So you could have, if Parsha Shkolim falls in Tetzaveh or in Vayakel, you could have the reading of Shkolim, the same reading of Kisisa, 2 weeks in a row. But if it's the Rosh Chodesh approach, like Rav says, so that's all the way off from Parshas Pinchas. That's never going to fall out close to Parsha Shkolim and Adar. How's that going to happen? But says no, it could happen because there are some people in Eretz Yisrael that have the meaning of completing the Torah once every 3 years, and therefore it cycles through the year. There is no set season. You don't have the same Parshas coming out at the same time every year, and it could come out that Parshas Pinchas, which contains the reading for Rosh Chodesh, falls out the week before or the week after Parshas Shkolim. Okay. Now, the Gemara says, we have a brisa that seems to say like Shmuel. It says Rosh Chodesh Adar falls on a Shabbos. So you read from Kisisa, and it's a after from Yehoyada HaKohen. So it clearly says explicitly like Shmuel. And that's Gemara's conclusion. Alright, now the Gemara goes on to, when do we take out 3 Sifrei Torah? So Rav Yitzchak Nafcha says, Rosh Chodesh Adar falls on a Shabbos. You take out 3 Sifrei Torah, 1 for the Parsha of the week, 1 for Parsha Shkolim, and 1 for Parsha Rosh Chodesh. This also clearly indicates that Shkolim and Rosh Chodesh is not the same thing. You have to read from different Sifrei Torah. So Gemara said that the Gemara doesn't bring that as a proof. That's just an aside. You could reject that and say you take 2 Sifrei Torah out for the same reading. So now the Gemara says that Rav Yitzchak Nafcha also says that when Rosh Chodesh Teves, which is Chanukah, falls out on a Shabbos, then you also take out 3 Sifrei Torah, 1 for the Parsha of the week, 1 for Rosh Chodesh, and 1 for Chanukah. So Gemara says, why does Rav Yitzchak Nafcha have to say both of those halachas? I can figure that out on my own. So Gemara says, well, you have to tell me about Parsha Shkolim for sure, because you may think like Rav. You may think you only take out 2, because it's the same Kriya. Because the Kriya Parsha Shkolim is also that of Rosh Chodesh. So therefore he has to say that. Why do you have to say the other one? So Gemara says, really, he didn't say the other one. The Chachamim figured it out based on his halacha. You take out 3 for Parsha Shkolim, which is Rosh Chodesh. You're also going to take out 3 Sifrei Torah for Rosh Chodesh, Shabbos, Chanukah. Okay, now the Gemara wants to know, when Rosh Chodesh is on Chanukah, meaning on Chanukah Rosh Chodesh Teves, during the week, what are you going to lane? You have 4 aliyahs, and you have to lane Rosh Chodesh and Chanukah. Now Rosh Chodesh every month, when it's not Chanukah, is 4 aliyahs. So how do you fit it together? So we're going to call it machlokes, whether you do 3 aliyahs of Chanukah and 1 of Rosh Chodesh, or 3 aliyahs of Rosh Chodesh and 1 of Chanukah. The argument to do 3 aliyahs of Rosh Chodesh and 1 of Chanukah is tadir v'she'ena tadir kodem. Usually when you have 2 things that are in conflict with each other, the one that comes more commonly takes precedence. Rosh Chodesh is more common than Chanukah. Chanukah is only 8 days, Rosh Chodesh is 18 days of the year. The argument that should be the other way is that Chanukah only gets 3 aliyahs. Rosh Chodesh is what's adding the 4th aliyah, so Rosh Chodesh should be the 4th aliyah. The Gemara quotes a number of different Amoraim who had this machlokes. The Gemara has Rav Yitzchak, Rav Dimi from Haifa. The Gemara says it was also an argument of Rav Mani and Rav Avin. The Gemara says that this machlokes continued. It went further, and you had Rabbah and Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef said, you don't pay attention to Rosh Chodesh, you just lay in Chanukah. 3 in Rosh Chodesh, 1. Rabbah said you don't pay attention to Chanukah. You lay in Rosh Chodesh 3 and Chanukah 1. And the way it's expressed is you don't pay attention to Chanukah. It even implies that if you happen to lane all 4 Rosh Chodesh by accident, you wouldn't have to go lane another one for Chanukah. It's okay if you missed it altogether.